My name's Lee Williams, and I'm the executive director of the College Autism Network. And welcome to the first of our four-part series for parents of college-bound autistic students. Um, the College Autism Network is a national association of primarily professionals who are practitioners and work with autistic students on college campuses, or researchers for whom this is their area of interest. We have employers and employment specialists who are very interested in our students as they graduate and move into the workforce. And of course, we have a lot of autistic self-advocates ourselves, undergraduates and graduate students who are part of our network. We've been around for about 9 years now. One of the things that we do is we offer a database that I'll tell you about before we wrap up today on our website of the 150 or so autism support programs that we know about on college campuses. And you'll be hearing a little bit more about those programs from our panelists. When we talk about ASPs and autism support programs, that is one strategy, one approach that a college or university might take to supporting autistic students. But the vast majority of colleges and universities provide services and support through their disability services and access office. So what I'd like to share with you a bit is the impetus for this series that came about from a lot of conversations with professionals like the ones on the screen here who work in or oversee these autism support programs and who know the value of well-informed parents when it comes to making important decisions about college. So our panelists are leaders on their campuses, and when it comes to helping autistic students navigate the institution, they are often the people who are the translators and advisors to a lot of autistic students. And so today we're going to be talking about housing and how it plays a part in the college selection process, or should, and what the housing options might be that you can explore. But I'm going to turn this over to my co-host here, who can tell you a little bit about his own journey, and that's Matt Gunter from Inclusive Academia. Matt?
Thanks, Lee. And hi, everybody. Yeah, unlike the other esteemed panelists here, I am really just a dad. My son, Peter, is a rising sophomore at the University of Arkansas, where he participates in the ASP, the Autism Support Program there. And happy to report he had an excellent first year. So really a success. Just very briefly about me, as Lee said, I host a little YouTube channel that I started called Inclusive Academia, and it's really to try to shed light on some of these topics and hopefully help some students and families that are exploring post-secondary options after high school. I also worked with Lee and with the College Autism Network. We conducted a survey and created a workbook on the topic of college readiness for neurodivergent students. And just this week, we also jointly published a summary of a brief survey that we did on tonight's topic, which is the role of housing in terms of decision-making for neurodivergent students. And let me just briefly talk a little bit about why I'm passionate about this topic. This was a particular focus, I think, for my son Peter and for our family in terms of evaluating his college options. Peter loves college sports. He also wanted to major in a STEM field, a data science or engineering type field. So he really was interested, frankly, in going to a larger university that had those kind of offerings. But I think many times the larger, fast-growing universities are the ones where they have the most restrictive issues related to housing. And we visited a lot of places that, for example, couldn't guarantee housing after the first year on campus. In some cases, they even said, apply early, can't guarantee housing at all. And while that might be fine for some students, I think Peter was concerned about that. We were concerned about that living off campus, even in his sophomore, junior year. just brings in a whole nother range of elements that you need to deal with. And there's a lot of transition that happens when you go off to college, be it neurodivergent or neurotypical for a student. But now you need to think about your meals. You need to drive to campus and park. You have to deal with a landlord potentially, those sorts of things. So we were also concerned about the social aspect of living away from home. Peter is a young man who is very interested in friends and being social. So I don't think he loved the idea of living by himself in a single room on campus. That was another element, but also was concerned about the dynamics of kind of random assignment of a roommate. So, long story short, I think he landed in an excellent place with the University of Arkansas. The director of the program, Dr. Eliza Green, has a great relationship with student housing. She has essentially kind of first choice with the university for students that are enrolled in her program. They live in a suite style, so he has three suite mates. He has his own private bedroom when he needs to escape and have time away. He shares a bathroom with one of his suite mates and then has a common area that he shares with three suite mates, all of whom are in the ASP program. And that's really given him, I think, the right blend of privacy and the ability to escape, but also the ability to have social interactions and make some friends. And importantly, she has this arrangement where he can stay on campus in Morgan Hall all 4 years if he chooses to do so. So that was the right solution for us. Obviously, every student's different, every university is different. But that's why I think this is a critically important topic and maybe one that parents and families, it may not be at the top of the list of considerations necessarily when you're thinking about things, but it drives a big portion of the students' happiness and potentially success on campus. So really excited to jump into this tonight.
Hey, thanks, Matt. We appreciate your sharing your particular journey. It's probably a reassuring journey for some people to hear about. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll start off with a few questions that Matt and I have for our panelists. And then we'll turn to your questions. And if at any point, as you're hearing somebody say something, you have a question, you want to follow up something, you can just drop it right into the Q&A box, and I'll be able to see that and ask that myself. And just a reminder that we are recording this session, so we will have it available for attendees who aren't here tonight. But I'd ask you not to share too much identifying information in your questions about your student. Okay, so let me turn this over to our panelists. Let's start with Kelly. Do you want to tell us all a little bit about yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Nix. I'm the Associate Director of the Engage program at the University of North Texas. Engage stands for Embracing Neurodivergent Groups in Academics and Gainful Employment. We can host about 40 students within our program, and they are all currently either living on campus, right off campus, at home, commuters. There's variations, but we work with them on academic, social, personal, and vocational goals.
I'm trying to read your lips. Lee, I think you said my name, but you're muted.
I did. That was very smart of you. Lindsay, would you like to go next?
I should have played that off as if it was rehearsed, but I am not that fast on my feet. So hi, everybody. It's nice to meet you all. My name is Lindsay Hill. I'm from Michigan State University. I am the program coordinator for the BOND program. It is a program that is sort of an additional resource to our Disability Services Office, so it is not a secondary application program. Students are eligible for this program if they register with our Disability Services Office. Typically under an autism diagnosis, but other neurodivergent conditions that are have similar impacts may also be eligible. Our program offers peer mentoring, social activities, additional executive functioning support, And then transition programming for our incoming students, like early move-in program and a fall seminar class that we run. Our students don't have dedicated housing in our because of our program. There are some freshman dorms on our campus, but about 20% of the students that register with me also apply for a single room, and many of those are granted, but not all. So we are also, as Matt said, one of those big universities that has limited housing. Our students are required to live on campus for 2 years, and then there is not a guarantee after that. Many of my students who want to live on campus, if they've applied in time, have the option to for all 4 years or 5 or 6.
Great. Thank you, Lindsay. Allie, next up.
Hi, everyone. I'm Allie. I'm the director of the Aspire program, which is at St. Joseph's University, which is located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We are a autism-specific support program that provides support in areas of executive functioning, time management, organization, socialization, and employment. We do that through a lot of different programming and have students have a lot of contact with us throughout the week. In terms of our size, we have about 80 students in our program. Our university is small to mid-sized, around 5,000 undergraduate students. In terms of housing, we're a little bit unique in that we do have a residence hall specific for our students as an option. So it's not a requirement that students live in that program or in that house, but it is an option where students can build additional independent living skills and social skills while having a dedicated space to, as students have put it, come back at the end of the day and just be their autistic self. We also have plenty of students who live in our traditional residence halls. Some do seek accommodations for single rooms. Some are looking for roommates. We have students who move off campus in their junior, senior plus years, and some students who commute from a family home. So really we see kind of all variety and really help students to find an option for housing that fits their needs.
Great. Thank you, Allie. And last up, we have Grace Hunter.
Hi, everybody. My name is Grace Hunter. I work for the Loyola University of Chicago, and I am an accessibility specialist. It's just a fancy name for a disability resource professional. So I facilitate the process of determining accommodations for students with disabilities who come into the university. I've worked there for about 2.5 years. We're about a mid-size urban private university. We do not have, at the moment, a specific program for students with autism, but I will say it's definitely one of our dreams to expand in that direction. But I hope I can help bring, a perspective of what the housing process is like, not only from, someone who's worked with students with autism, but also a wide variety of different disabilities, and what that looks like in the housing process. So at Loyola University of Chicago, we do have a 2-year on-campus living requirement. So that's a little unusual. A lot of places just have that first year. Because we're an urban campus, we are quite squished in. It's a beautiful campus, but it is quite squished in. So housing can be a challenge just because literally brick and mortar rooms aren't always available. But we get into a lot of creative solutions and try our best to determine what equitable access to housing. So I hope I can help bring some interesting perspective to that.
Great. Thanks, Grace, and thanks, everybody. So I'd like to just start with a pretty broad question, and that's how should housing options fit into the decision to further consider a college or university? As the family is making that list, as the student is making a list, as the college counselor is making that list, what should people be thinking about related to housing? Who'd like to start us off? Allie?
I could start, sure. So I talk with a lot of prospective students and families about our program, but in those conversations, we oftentimes talk about what they're looking for in a college or university, as well as if they're looking for an autism or neurodiversity support program as well. Really, I always let the student and family know that they really need to think about their readiness for living independently. And some people aren't there yet. They might have the readiness for the academics, but maybe not the readiness for living independently, as independently as living on campus is. And may need to consider commuting or living from a family home, which obviously would limit their college choices to the parameters of how far they could get to from their family home. I think that, if you've determined that there is readiness for living independently, then really thinking about preference and what's most important. Is it important to have that single room accommodation? And is that a possibility at the university you're looking at? And if it's a possibility, is it still within a first year community, or are single rooms often put into sometimes an upperclassmen housing area or a separate housing area that wouldn't allow for a lot of community building? There's so many different things to consider, and I really think that just having those conversations and hearing about some different options, which you'll hear throughout tonight, is really key to figuring out what would be the best fit for your student.
Thanks,
Can-
Allie.
I can
Lindsay?
follow up on that from a sort of a large university perspective. This is probably one of the things that I make sure to bring up to every prospective family. Our university is our housing is very old. It's very old school, dormitory style, 2 people to a room mostly. We've got lots of schools and universities around us that have more of like what Matt talked about with the more of the apartment style where you might have your own room but share a space with other people, which we don't have. So I'm really clear with folks about the sort of shortcomings of this housing style. A lot of students have been to something like this. They've done camps, they've had experience. But if they haven't, I really encourage folks to really think through what that might look like. Sharing a space or even applying for a single, um, you're still around a lot of people. There's still a lot of expectations. And also like bathroom style is a big one to consider. So we have some bathrooms that are on the floor versus a suite style where you're sharing with the other room next to you. So you might be sharing that bathroom with 2 other people, even if you're still in a single, so all of those considerations. But just from a large university perspective that doesn't have a lot of options, I just always make sure that folks are taking this into high consideration when they're applying.
I would just jump in on one thing you said there, Lindsay. Like, think about the bathroom situation because everybody loves the idea of a private bathroom, but then your student's responsible for keeping that bathroom clean too. So the communal bathroom has some benefits in that regards.
Mhm.
I also want to say, just look at like your consider the adjustment time for certain things, because if we look at a student holistically, they're not just adjusting to living somewhere different, but they're also adjusting to college level academics and social interactions, people that they've never been around most of the time, most of them. So how big is this adjustment for them, and is this going to be something that is pushing them over the edge, or is this something that will complement where they're at?
Great point. Several of you mentioned the single versus roommate option. Grace, you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I think that is a huge desire that we see with students coming in, especially, even though we're moving past a lot of the post-COVID years, that that insecurity, that nervousness around living with other people is still there, and it's really the feelings are valid, absolutely. One of the things I like to challenge students is really to come when I start my conversations with students. I start from a strengths-based perspective. I ask them to describe their short and long-term goals. Do they picture themselves by junior, senior year living with a roommate or sharing, an apartment with maybe closed bedrooms with each other, but living with a person. Do they want to live in the city? Do they want to move away? I see these students' light bulbs really turn on when they think about their long-term goals. Um, but at the same time, being very respectful of what their sensory needs, their emotional needs are. When I ask the student to explain to me what their ideas are about that, they often come to the conclusion themselves. So sometimes students will say, yeah, I know I'm a little interesting. I know I have specific interests, but I think I would be fine, sharing a restroom with three other people. Or, when I hear that bit of interest there, I say, okay, how can we make this happen? What, and I also like to encourage students to think of, to start thinking early on, what if it goes plan A, or what does plan B look like? If you had a roommate, what would be the next step? And I would encourage parents, as well as any other K-12 educators or counselors, to really start early with that discussion and map it out. What would that look like? And often the student will arrive to the answer themselves of what they would like.
That's a great overall approach for a lot of topics. Matt, did you have a question for the group?
Yeah, I guess for all the panelists, I'm sure families come in with some preconceived notions about housing. It could even relate to the glory days when they themselves were in college. And what do you think are some of the misconceptions that you find families bringing into their research around the topic of housing? They could be, for example, unreasonable expectations about single rooms. That could be a myriad of things. But what are some of those kind of misperceptions that you sometimes need to kind of re-steer folks a little bit when they're first considering this topic?
I'll go ahead and talk on this one. One of the biggest things that we hear from our families is, can you just go to their room and knock on their door and wake them up? Or can you go and remind them to take a shower or ask them if they're going to class? And unfortunately, that's not something we do. The student does have to have a level of independence, as Ali was speaking to earlier. And there has to be realistic expectations of what the RA can provide, what the support programs provide, because oftentimes it's more focused on, for RAs, is the room clean? Are we in compliance? Are we managing conflict resolution? Support programs can go in and say, okay, from an outside perspective, I know that you need to put on your schedule that it's time to do some laundry, or that we're going to plug in some time for self-care, that kind of thing. But we just can't go to rooms and bring students out. And so I do want to speak to that. As much as sometimes we want to, the student still has to have a level of independence. So.
Great point, Kelly. Who else would like to share? Allie?
Yeah, Matt, you kind of brought up a point that I was thinking about of, parents coming in and talking a lot about this experience that they might have had in college. Kind of like, well, my roommate, it's my best man at my wedding, and, we're still best friends and we had the time of our life and stayed up late and whatever. And not to say that that's not going to be the case for an autistic student, but I think that sometimes parents and all of us forget that, for students with an autism diagnosis may really need that alone time and that break from sensory input. And that's kind of where either a single room, or sometimes we have students who would like to live with another student in our program because sometimes they feel they might be able to both come to an agreement about their own sensory challenges or their both unique needs. Um, and I think it's just important that parents understand that their experience sounds great. It just may not be the experience of their child. And it might not be what their child wants. I get calls from parents a lot of, like Kelly said, can't you make them go do events and go to social things and get them out of their room? And I'll talk to the student and say, do you feel lonely? Do you feel like you need to be more social, and they say, nah, I'm great. Like I go to clubs and I, have some social events I go to, but when I'm done at the end of the day, like I want to be done. And on the weekends, that's really my time to recharge. So really figuring out what is the student actually looking for and what do they need.
Thanks, Allie. Linz?
To follow up on that, I think one of the things that I know parents have to be concerned about, so I don't want to make it sound like, oh, you're not thinking about it at all, but mental health concerns, I think when students are living in their own spaces, are sort of disconnected from other people, what is the process? Do you have a process with your student to sort of check in on their mental health, and what's this Batman signal, or whatever the case may be? Because I think that's just one of the concerns, and I do have parents bring it to me as well, like, oh, well, they want a single, but I don't want them living by themselves. I'd actually rather them have a roommate so that somebody is there to notice when things aren't going well. So I think all of those are, conversations to be having as a family before they get there. And so if you are in a single room, what's the plan? How are we going to know that you are okay? Because if you disconnect because you want to be disconnected, great, but that can spiral really quickly. I have students that talk to me about that, where they really do love their alone time and they love their own space, but they have gotten into, just sort of pits of despair, major depression, when they don't have somebody that's kind of there all the time checking on them. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think in in your line of work, right, you're always trying to balance challenge and support with your students, right? You want to challenge students so that they grow and they learn. You don't want to over challenge them because then they retreat. You want to support them so they feel cared about and connected, but you don't want to over support them because then they don't grow. They don't learn. So always walking that very fine line. And I wonder, it brings up a question for me when you're helping a family think through the options. If living at home and attending the university or the college is an option, even for that first year, I wonder what your thoughts are on the pluses and minuses of living at home and commuting versus living on campus. Would like to take that one.
I can start.
Grace.
I I will start by saying, it is so individualized, and we're really respectful and appreciative when families are able to share with their, with their student what their concerns are, and really mapping out the pros and cons of each. That there is, I will say, there is a lot of great research and support out there for community living for students who are engaged in community living on, like, living on campus, typically have access their accommodations and access their resources on campus more often, as well as problem solve more often than students who commute. That is to say, it's not a perfect solution for everybody. So we try and, in the process of meeting with prospective college, I would encourage the parents and the students to practice talking about what their needs and wants are, what their goals are again, and then practice talking, and maybe even doing a modeling conversation with a school counselor of explaining what things do help them feel comfortable in an environment. If bringing a weighted blanket and keeping the lights out at certain times of day is something that would aid them and help them live on campus, maybe it's worth that shot. But if it's overall going to be detrimental to their overall health, and that's a very respectful choice too.
Mhm. Anyone else want to address that commuting option? Okay.
We do have several students that do commute, and I just see them. I think this is similar to what Grace is saying a little bit. Like, I see them being less connected in many ways. A lot of the social experiences that happen on campus, even if students are going off campus, it's sort of almost a drop of the hat, like let's meet up and go. And so when a student is living off campus, especially if they don't have their own transportation or they might be using public transportation, it's less, it's just more difficult to do those spur of the moment things, to stay late, stay on, come on the weekends when they're not here anyway. So I do see them less connected. But that being said, I also have seen students that have transitioned in after going to community college, and they're still living at home, and many of their academic skills are better, and they're dealing with academics in a much better way than some of our on-campus students. So I think there's some give and take.
Point.
I agree with what Lindsay was saying. We've seen that on our campus. We are largely a commuter campus, but we do have about, I believe it's 9 residence halls. So we're fairly large. One thing that we encourage our students who do commute to do is, if feasible, spend the day on campus. So if you have classes Monday, Wednesday, Friday, spend time on campus, because sometimes if students live close enough, they'll go home and then come back. And we're kind of putting it in the mindset that, okay, so you're coming here, we'll spend the day here, and that gives you some time to go to the library and study, or meet up with a study group, or engage in some campus activities that are going on. That way they get the full experience as much as they can without having to live on campus. So if that's feasible for the student, encourage them to stay on campus and do some things while they're there in between classes, or encourage them to talk to partners in classes, maybe go have lunch or something like that. But as much as they can interact with the services while they're there could be really helpful in kind of bridging that if they live at home.
I have
Great point.
one kind of follow-up question for you all coming out of some of the great responses that you had over the last few minutes. So, a lot changes when students are living on their own, and I'm sure there are some parents that are wondering, are there things that they can do to help build some of the skills that will be needed when the student is living on their own while they are still living at home in high school, the summer before school, etc. So rather than just kind of dropping them off and saying good luck, are there things that parents can work on with their students while they're still in the nest, if you will?
I'll say one of the biggest things, if your student takes any medications, that they have to be fully ready to independently manage their medications and when they take them, and eating if they need to with those medications. We find that, especially for students who might have co-occurring ADHD, that really disruption to that medication schedule will throw absolutely everything off. And it's we've heard a lot of students, well, I come downstairs for breakfast and my medication's on the table and that's when I take it. And I'm like, okay, so you take it with breakfast. Could you, plan to take it with your breakfast here? They're like, well, I miss breakfast because I'm oversleeping before my class. Okay, so now we've established 2 areas. You're not taking your medication and you're oversleeping and you're missing class. Like, so it just kind of compiles on each thing. The other big thing I'll say is if it is a bathroom that they have to clean, or even it's a bathroom that someone comes in and cleans, but like you have to clean it if you make a mess. They have to know how to wipe down a counter with some Clorox wipes, and just generally not leaving their clothes on the bathroom floor, not, leaving their toothbrush just on the counter, right? There are certain things where students have gotten very comfortable at home, and maybe mom or dad has come in after them and just kind of cleaned up their mess. They have to be able to clean up their mess, or they're really going to struggle interpersonally because other students are going to have a big problem with that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Allie. Go ahead,
I have-
Kelly.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Grace.
Thank you. I have two big things. They mostly center around problem solving. So one of the biggest challenges I see students having is if they notice something's wrong and they want to access a resource, like using our testing center, for example. Oh, I need to book a test. Oh, I can't figure out how the online booking works. Instead of calling our office or stopping in saying, "Hi, could you please help me book an exam?" or emailing us, they just say, "Well, I couldn't figure it out." So I know this sounds, and every student's communication is different, and I know this sounds small, but really it does make a difference is if a student is frustrated about, well, this is not working, or my professor is not answering my question, saying, "What have you tried? Have you tried to call them? What are some other people on campus you can ask for help?" And also like just like writing that email. What does a quick polite email look like? And then my other biggest suggestion is due dates. Just there's a lot of due dates in university. It's very overwhelming, but maybe even in high school, get used to highlighting due dates on your syllabus, but also things like, there's due dates for signing up for exams, there's due dates for signing up for housing. That's a big one. And, the availability of things changes in the academic school year if you're not paying attention to like drop dates and enrollment dates. And it's a lot, but I think with some practice and support, it's a really handy skill for students.
That's great. Thank you, Grace. And, as I'm listening to all of you, what really strikes me, and my professional background is more generalist. I was a dean of students, and everything that you suggest could be made better if a student was more prepared is true of every student, right? Like, neurotypical, neurodivergent. Um, so I think really it's just a matter of somehow getting them through that first year of college, which is tough, for anybody at that age, traditional age students. I we have a question from one of our attendees, and it's a great question. And you've all mentioned the sort of single room, but single rooms, you run out of them, right? And then there's not one available. And so this person is asking if you have any solutions or approaches to help students navigate having a roommate if a single room isn't available. So a single room might have been the preferred or optimal situation. Didn't happen. Now they've got a roommate. What do you do?
First, before you even get there, before they even have the roommate, please make sure that the student is filling out the little survey about themselves accurately, and that mom or dad is not filling it out for what they wish their student was like. Because a lot of schools will have kind of like a matchmaker survey of, do you stay up late? Are you messy? Do you need it to be clean? What temperature do you like the room at? Do you, like to have people over? What noise do you like? Can't tell you how many times I've had, a parent kind of fill out the survey for their student, and I look at the results and I'm like, this is not the student. They're like, well, I wanted them to have a roommate that was like this. And I was like, well, now you've just created a situation where you have two opposite people. So really spending some time, while you're searching for a roommate to make sure that that person is a good match. We have a lot of students who will look for a roommate who also is participating in our support program, which might be an option at other schools. So I think just making sure that you put that effort in. Please don't do random roommate. It very rarely does that go well. It's two people who just decided not to fill out the necessary forms, and it doesn't always, not to say it never, but spend some time making sure that you've put some effort into who you want to live with.
I'm going to build off of that. Our students fill out a survey, and then there's also a roommate agreement. It's not required by students, but we highly encourage our students to fill that out. Community, building with the people that they're with. Like, what do we want to see in our shared spaces? But I think too, in preparation for going into this situation, this could be implemented in the house too when they're at home. Okay, so we're going to shift our thinking to what happens when we have a roommate. This bathroom is community in our home. So, what are some things that might be expected of you when you live on campus? But really filling out that form. We call it a roommate success agreement. We're connected to students RA so we can facilitate communication when something's going wrong. But we also work with our students on making a decision tree because sometimes we have students where they hear a noise on the other side of the wall and they're like, immediately, I'm going to go tell on my roommate. Or we have somebody who's dealt with a roommate bringing guests over many times. They're not able to sleep and get stuff done, but they don't say anything because they feel like they can't. So decision trees. Okay, so if this is happening, then what are we doing? And that kind of plays into the agreement, but it also gives them an avenue for, okay, so this is the time I need to go to my RA. This is the time I need to have the conversation with my roommate. Kind of gives them a little bit of a guide. We can't foresee everything that's going to happen, but at least they have the tools they need in case something does come up.
It's a great answer, Kelly, and I want to follow up on that because I'm curious. Tell us about your role when things aren't going well. Where do you step in to support the students that you're working with? What does an RA do that's different? So where does the student go to get that help? Grace, I saw you nodding.
Yeah, I didn't want to step on anyone else. No, this happens, and I want to affirm and normalize that this happens to students with or without neurodivergence. Like roommate challenges happen, and it's part of the process. It's not fun always, but I think I want to encourage students that there are resources out there. They may not all be with the accessibility or the disability center. For example, if a student comes to me and explains the challenges they're having with their roommate, I'm absolutely happy to listen to them and kind of brainstorm solutions with them. From an accessibility standpoint, I may not have that ability to, to really get into the roommate situation. So I would say the residential life team and the RAs are more familiar with specific tools. Like, for example, roommate contracts are something that our floors do use on occasion. RAs will meet with the floors on a regular basis, encourage the use of written quick contracts about cleanliness and times you're awake or asleep. I think it's surprising to some students to realize that their roommate is out of the room a lot of the time, more than they think, because you're out and about in classes and meals and social things. So you're not going to be in there all the time with each other. But I would say go to the resources. The residential hall advisors and RAs will be more familiar with the smaller conflicts. But if there are larger conflicts, absolutely you have rights as a student to work with the dean of students or the student affairs office on those deeper issues. Students with or without disabilities have those same access to those resources.
Mm-hmm.
Our program provides comprehensive training to our residence life, all of our RAs, as well as our professional staff, which really creates a system where RAs are well informed about how to best support neurodivergent students, but in turn, a lot of the things that we recommend for them are actually helpful for all students. We have regular and as needed communication with our residence life staff. So the RAs themselves are not necessarily aware, unless a student shares it themselves, that a student is connected to our office. But the professional staff who oversees the RAs would know that information and can work with our team. But even for students who may not be connected to our program, because of the work that we've done up front to really provide that training to our campus community, we have created a campus community that's very well informed of how to assist people in problem solving and understanding unique needs. So I think that's also something to think about in your search for a college or a university is, what if there is an autism support program or disability services office, what type of interactions do they have with residence life or other campus departments in terms of training or any sort of consultation.
So asking those questions and then listening for answers that are evidence of a collaborative relationship across campus. Sounds like that's really key for helping your students be successful. And folks, if you have questions and want to put them in the Q&A box, we will get to them too. Matt, do you want to take the next question?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that would be interesting is as students are conducting their college search and either virtually or even better, physically coming to campus, everybody takes kind of the admissions dog and pony show, and they usually walk you through a typical freshman dorm room. But for this audience, what are some questions that you would recommend students and families ask about the housing situation, particular to, neurodivergent students, be they in an autism support program or outside of that? But all of the topics that we brought up tonight, like, how would you distill those down to, like, boy, these are the questions that you really should be asking on every campus you visit? Who wants to go first?
I would say a great question would be what does community engagement look like on campus? Whether that's in a residence hall or we've talked about commuting, we at St. Joe's have a specific space on campus for commuters to hang out during the day. They have swipe access. So it's kind of like if other students are going back to their, dorm room in between classes, they have a commuter lounge with fridge and microwave and things to heat up your lunch and just a nice social space. So what does that community engagement look like from whatever status you are, residential or not? What type of programming, is involved? And how active are people in that programming? It's great to have events, but if no one goes, then how exciting is that, right? And how do they select RAs? What is that process like? How many RAs are there per floor or per building? Um, I've always been at universities that have a pretty good ratio of RAs, at least usually two per floor or, one per floor, depending on the floor size. But I've heard other schools, that really might have a hard time finding RAs or don't invest in RAs. So our RAs at St. Joe's have free room and board, which is a great option for RAs. So it shows that they're really investing in them. I've saw in a parent Facebook group that they still had to pay for room and board and they got like $1,000 discount, which did not seem like enough for me. So they had a hard time finding RAs because they weren't investing in it. So those are some things that I would think to ask, but love to hear from others.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I would encourage families to ask about is, or just ask program staff or whoever you're able to meet with is, especially if it's an autism program, ask them to tell you about some success stories and some horror stories, for lack of a better word. What are the students, what kinds of students are succeeding here, what kinds of students are not? Just having them give you those stories, I think a lot of times will help you find where your own student fits in those stories. Because it's, when somebody's coming to me, I've just met you, I've had, 5 minutes with your student. I don't know what their strengths are, their struggles are, but you know them really well. So maybe hearing some of these stories can help. A lot of parents will ask about, tell me about what students are successful in this program. And that's again, a really easy one for me to give some stories about, but they don't often say tell me some stories about students that are successful in housing, or like what kinds of housing, or, things like that, because we don't have dedicated disclosure around our students. So nobody knows anything unless a student says something to them. We're a huge university. And we're a legacy school, right? Like students want to come here because their parents went here, their grandparents went here, like, so they don't care. The students don't care what the housing is like, or what the support system is like. They just want to come here at all costs. And so maybe hearing some of those stories about students that have really struggled in housing situations can help the student even see themselves to say, oh, I really need to work on that before I get there, or maybe this isn't really the right place for me.
I completely agree with that. I love that. And I haven't thought of that. So that's a great question to ask, especially the perspective that an individual will get. Um, I also think too, we hear a lot of times where parents think that their students need to be a certain level, like they need to have full independence and they've got all these things covered. And it's definitely a balance. So what supports are available to help in the skills that the student doesn't have? Are they naturally developed? But then I also think too, asking about the long-term living situation for students, because our students are guaranteed to live on campus as a freshman, but if they're returning or sophomores higher, they're not guaranteed housing. So that really means that that freshman year is critical to developing those skills and then getting on the wait list potentially. But I mean, we do have upperclassmen that get put on campus if they're in the wait list, if they're high on the wait list. But it's just good to know, like, what does this look like long term, and what can we do while they're in housing to kind of support their independent living. So in case they need to launch after that first year, they have a little bit of footing.
Great point. And I think, one thing to really emphasize is just because a student isn't ready at this moment doesn't mean they'll never be ready, right? And so this might not feel like the right fit. Living on campus might not feel like the right fit, but we're educators. We want to see people change and grow over time. So it might be an extra year. One of the things that I often tout is the idea of what I call a half-step year, which is living at home, taking a couple of community college classes, and having a set of benchmarks that a student has to achieve in order to be able to go off and live in a residence hall at Michigan State. And it might be things like you manage your medication on your own. You don't need any help from us. You manage to get to class. You get your work done. You advocate for yourself with your professor. Those are benchmarks that that can be achieved while living at home with the safety net of the family there if things go awry. Because again, in that role as dean of students, I've been involved with some really heartbreaking situations where students weren't ready to be there. And when they leave mid-semester or at the end of the semester, it's devastating for them personally, and it's financially pretty devastating for a lot of families too.
I would also just like
yeah,
to
go ahead, Lindsay.
remind folks that as much as I would love for that to be a thing that everybody can do, sometimes schools will not offer housing for transfer students. So if students did classes and are transferring those in, they're now considered a transfer student. Housing is not guaranteed. So it's just, again, just something to think about.
Yeah, a great question to ask.
But Lee,
ahead,
I think
Matt.
you make an excellent point on growth too. I mean, just data point of one, but the growth that we saw in our son over the course of his freshman year was night and day. And I think the housing situation was a big part of that. I mean, he had to make more decisions on his own and manage his calendar and do his own laundry. And I think that's an important part of college too. It's not just passing English and math and walking out with a sheepskin. It's also learning how to manage human relationships and take care of yourself and everything. And I think we saw a tremendous amount of growth. And so I would just say to parents out there, it can be daunting when they go away, but if you trust the process, and particularly if you do have the ability to get help from an autism support program or similar, we were kind of amazed by the amount of growth we saw in just 1 year away at school. So that's the upside potential.
Your son is going to be one of those success stories that Dr. Green shares when somebody asks that question now. We are getting close to the top of the hour, and I don't want to forget to say thank you to our panelists, Kelly, Grace, Allie, and Lindsay, all of whom contributed to this research that we did that led to the creation of this workbook. And I have Matt to thank for this. College Readiness for Neurodivergent Students. And this workbook, which you can find on our website or on the Inclusive Academia website or the College Ready website, 2 places. We can maybe drop those into the chat there, Matt. But it's designed to encourage family conversations about readiness, because really what our program director said when we were starting this research was we just want parents to know that, like, there are some really good questions you can be asking that will make a big difference. And what was interesting in this is the top 2 predictors of success that our program director said. One is the student has to want to be there. And you think that's sort of an obvious thing, but it's not. Some students are on a track and they don't even stop to think, maybe this isn't what I want to do. So number 1, they have to want to be there. And number 2 is they have to be willing to accept help when it's offered and needed. And, as somebody said who filled out the survey that led to this workbook, if you've got those 2 things in place, just about everything else can be taught. But without those 2 things, it really is hard for students to show that kind of growth. So please subscribe to the YouTube channel, Inclusive Academia. You'll see a lot of interviews with some of our panelists here and others who are asked questions about their program. And it's a great way to take a tour of different programs without having to leave the comfort of your home. And if you go on the CAN website, the collegeautismnetwork.org website, there's under resources, there's a tab for families and college-bound students. Lots of really great resources for you to look at. And I'm particularly excited about a website called College for All, and you'll find it there on our website under resources. And it was developed by a high school student to help college-bound high school students kind of make sense of this journey themselves. And so if you think that some of the more resource-oriented websites are a little stuffy for your students and they want something that's a little more in their language, College for All is a great place to do that. All right, so we have, so thank you, Brittany, for those links. And we'll leave those up for a few minutes so you can grab them. But I want to thank you all for joining us this evening and remind you that our second webinar on the topic of mental health will take place a week from tonight at the same time, and we hope to see you back. And then we have one in July and one in August, and that will be our series. So, anybody else? Matt, any last thoughts?
No, just thank you for the panelists. Thank you to all of our parents that joined, and hope to see you all again very, very soon. I mean, I think again I would end on a high note of there's a lot to navigate with your student as you're thinking about these things, but if you do your research and don't be afraid to reach out to the amazing people that work in these programs, like the panelists that we have tonight. They're truly a godsend, and I think the growth that your student can experience can be truly amazing. So
Wonderful way to wrap up, Matt. Thanks. So thanks, everybody, and we'll see some of you next week. And take care and enjoy the rest of the week and have a great weekend as well.